One decision by one admiral changed the entire future of the One Piece world. If Akainu's magma fist had missed by even a few inches, Portgas D Ace would still be alive today. And the entire story we have been watching for the last decade would not exist. Today we are exploring what happens if Ace never died at Marineford. This is pure speculation, but the consequences go far deeper than most fans realize. Marineford. The war that broke the One Piece world in half. Ace's death is not just a tragic moment. It is the single hinge point that the entire post-timeskip story swings on. Luffy's trauma. The formation of the worst generation's rise. Whitebeard's death. The collapse of the old era of pirates. Almost everything that happens after Marineford exists because Ace did not survive it. So today, we are asking the question seriously. What if that magma fist never landed? This is theory and speculation from start to finish. Oda has never confirmed any alternate version of this event. But by tracing the dominoes backward from what we know about these characters, we can build a genuinely compelling picture of how differently this story could have unfolded. Let's get into it. Consequence. Number 1. Luffy never breaks. The most immediate and obvious change is Luffy himself. Ace's death is the single most devastating emotional moment in Luffy's entire journey. It breaks him completely, to the point where he loses consciousness for days, refuses to eat, and has to be physically dragged back from the edge of total collapse by Jinbei and Rayleigh. That breakdown is also what forces the 2-year time skip to happen the way it did. Luffy needed that time not just to train, but to heal from losing his brother in the most violent way imaginable. If Ace survives, Luffy still loses the war. He still watches Whitebeard die. He still witnesses the horror of Marineford. But he does not lose his brother specifically. Speculatively, this likely means a faster, less emotionally devastating recovery. Luffy probably still trains under Rayleigh. The need to get stronger after witnessing the new world's power level does not disappear. But the specific trauma that defines his early post-time skip characterization, the haunted, quieter Luffy we see in the opening of the Fishman Island arc, may never fully develop the same way. Ace surviving does not make Luffy weaker. If anything, having his brother alive might give him an even stronger emotional anchor heading into the new world. Consequence. Number 2. Whitebeard's death loses its final purpose. This one is more complicated because Whitebeard's death is tied to multiple threads, not just Ace. Whitebeard already intended to die at Marineford regardless of the outcome for Ace. He was terminally ill, and the entire war was partly his final stand to protect his son. But the specific manner of his death, the moment after Ace dies, when Whitebeard's grief and fury allow him to unleash his full power and crack the sky itself, is directly triggered by witnessing his son's death in front of him. If Ace survives, Whitebeard's final battle likely still happens. He was always going to die in this war one way or another, given his health and his commitment to ending things on his own terms. But the emotional engine behind his final moments changes completely. Instead of dying in devastated grief and explosive rage, Whitebeard could die having actually succeeded in his one true goal, protecting his son until the very end. That is a genuinely different death. Less tragic in the way that broke fans' hearts, but arguably a more complete and dignified ending for the strongest man in the world. Oda may have chosen the version we got specifically because it hits harder emotionally. But a surviving Ace gives Whitebeard's death actual narrative closure instead of devastating loss layered on top of devastating loss. Consequence. Number 3. The Three Captains era never forms. The same way. Here is where things get genuinely fascinating from a world-building perspective. Ace's death directly creates a power vacuum among Whitebeard's former territory and the remaining Whitebeard pirates. It also removes one of the most promising future Yonko candidates from the board entirely. Someone who, by Oda's own statements outside the manga, was considered as a potential future captain of immense influence. If Ace survives Marineford, he likely inherits leadership of a significant portion of Whitebeard's old crew and territory, given his standing as 2nd Division commander. This creates a scenario where the new world's post-Whitebeard power structure looks completely different. Instead of Blackbeard claiming Whitebeard's old territory and rising rapidly in the power vacuum, which directly leads to him eventually becoming a Yonko himself, Ace surviving and consolidating Whitebeard's old forces could seriously slow or even block Blackbeard's rise entirely. Blackbeard's entire post-Marineford strategy depends on chaos and a leadership void in former Whitebeard territory. Ace alive and organized is the single biggest obstacle to that plan, succeeding the way it did. This means the entire current Yonko lineup, Blackbeard included, might look completely different in this scenario. Speculatively, Ace himself could be sitting in one of those 4 seats today. Consequence number 4. Sabo never inherits. The Mera Mera No Mi. This is one of the most direct mechanical changes, and it is easy to trace clearly. Ace's devil fruit, the Mera Mera No Mi, only becomes available again because he dies. Sabo eventually consumes it during the Reverie arc, inheriting his brother's fire powers and using them to become one of the most powerful members of the Revolutionary Army. If Ace never dies, that fruit never becomes available. Sabo's entire power progression from that point forward is built on having Ace's fire abilities. Without it, his role in the Reverie arc and his fight against Burgess plays out completely differently, assuming it happens at all in a similar form. This is significant because it means an entire branch of the story, Sabo's rise to becoming a major Revolutionary Army powerhouse using fire abilities specifically, simply does not exist in this timeline. Sabo would likely still be powerful and important to the revolutionary cause, but his specific identity as a fire user, so closely tied to honoring his dead brother, never forms the same way. Consequence. Number 5. The world government's greatest symbolic victory disappears. And finally, the consequence that touches the entire political structure of the story. Ace's execution and death at Marineford is treated by the world government as a massive symbolic victory, proof that even Whitebeard, the strongest man alive, could not protect his own son from the law. It is meant to terrify the world into compliance and reaffirm absolute government authority. If Ace survives, even if the war is still technically a loss for the pirates in terms of overall casualties, the symbolic narrative flips completely. The world government's entire propaganda victory evaporates. Instead of, even Whitebeard could not save his son, the story becomes, Whitebeard's forces saved Ace despite everything thrown against them. That shift alone could meaningfully change how the public perceives pirate power versus government power heading into the post-Marineford era, potentially accelerating exactly the kind of new era instability that Garp warns about and that the government feared in the first place, just through a different symbolic trigger than the one we actually got. Conclusion. So that is the full picture, built entirely on speculation. Luffy heals faster but possibly less completely transformed by grief. Whitebeard gets a death with actual closure instead of devastating loss. Blackbeard's rise to Yonko status is seriously threatened or even prevented. Sabo never becomes a fire user, and the world government loses its single greatest propaganda victory of the era. None of this is confirmed. Oda wrote the story the way he wrote it specifically because Ace's death carries enormous narrative weight. It is one of the most important emotional turning points in the entire series for a reason. But tracing these dominoes backward shows just how carefully constructed this single moment actually is. Pull that one thread, and almost everything downstream of Marineford starts unraveling into a completely different story. Call to action. So I want to hear from you. If Ace had survived Marineford, do you think Luffy ends up stronger, or does he actually become softer without that specific trauma pushing him forward? And do you think Ace would have eventually become a Yonko himself? Drop your theory in the comments right now. Subscribe for more One Piece deep dives every day. I will see you in the next one.